Previously on World History and Geography.
During the Renaissance in Italy, the work of such artists as Leonardo da Vinci, Donatello, Raphael, Michelangelo showed the Renaissance spirit. All four artists demonstrated an interest in classical culture, a curiosity about the world, and a belief in human potential. Humanist writers expanded ideas about individuality. These ideas impressed scholars, students, and merchants who visited Italy. By the late 1400s, Renaissance ideas had spread to Northern Europe, especially England, France, Germany, and Flanders. Flanders is an area located in modern-day France and Belgium. Okay.
And now, our feature presentation.
By 1450, the population of Northern Europe, which had declined due to the bubonic plague, was beginning to grow again. When the destructive Hundred Years' War between France and England ended in 1453, many cities grew rapidly. Urban merchants became wealthy enough to sponsor artists. This happened first in Flanders, which was rich from long-distance trade and the cloth industry. Then, as wealth increased in other parts of Northern Europe, patronage of artists increased. Italy was divided into city-states. In contrast, England and France were each unified under a strong monarch. These rulers often sponsored the arts by purchasing paintings and by supporting artists and writers. For example, Francis I of France invited Leonardo da Vinci to retire in France, and was even there when Leonardo died. King Francis hired Italian artists and architects to rebuild and decorate his castle at Fontainebleau.
Fontainebleau.
The castle became a showcase for Renaissance art. As Renaissance ideals spread out of Italy, they mingled with Northern traditions. As a result, the Northern Renaissance developed its own character. For example, the artists were especially interested in realism. In 1494, a French king claimed the throne of Naples in southern Italy and launched an invasion through northern Italy. As the war dragged on, many Italian artists and writers left for a safer life in Northern Europe. They brought with them the styles and techniques of the Italian Renaissance. In addition, Northern European artists who had studied in Italy carried Renaissance ideas back to their homelands. Perhaps the most famous person to do this was the German artist Albrecht Dürer. Actually, that's a self-portrait of Dürer at the age of 13. And here is a self-portrait at the age of 22, and a self-portrait at the age of 26, and a self-portrait at the age of 28, and here he is in 1993. Okay, not really. He traveled to Italy to study in 1494. After returning to Germany, Dürer produced detailed woodcuts and engravings. The engravings have the finer lines. Anyway, he also produced paintings and drawings. Many of his works portray religious subjects. Others portray classical myths or realistic landscapes. The popularity of Dürer's work helped to spread Renaissance styles. Dürer's emphasis on realism influenced the work of another German artist, Hans Holbein the Younger, not to be mistaken with Hans Holbein the Elder. Anyway, Holbein specialized in painting portraits that are almost photographic in detail, like in the painting The Ambassadors. These guys look real, and then here are the objects on the two shelves. The detail of each item is pretty amazing. Oh, and the odd thing is if you tilt the painting and look at it from the lower right corner, you see that the weird blob on the detailed mosaic floor becomes, that's a skull. A skull rendered in anamorphic perspective. Anyway, Holbein emigrated to England where he painted portraits of King Henry VIII and other members of the English royal family. Support of wealthy merchant families in Flanders helped to make Flanders the artistic center of Northern Europe. The first great Flemish Renaissance painter was Jan van Eyck. Van Eyck used recently developed oil-based paints to develop techniques that painters still use today. By applying layer upon layer of paint, Van Eyck was able to create a variety of subtle colors in clothing and jewels. Oil painting became popular and spread to Italy. Leonardo da Vinci sometimes used oils. In addition to new techniques, Van Eyck's paintings display unusually realistic details and reveal the personality of the subjects. Like in this portrait of Giovanni Arnolfini and his wife. Look at the details of the objects, including the chandelier with one candle and the cute little puppy. If you take a closer look at the mirror in the back of the room, you see in the reflection the backs of the couple and the artist painting the portrait. Major events of Christ's life appear in the frame of the mirror. Van Eyck's fancy signature, tagged on the wall above the mirror, lets us know that he created this. Amazing Flemish painting continued in the mid-16th century with the work of Peter Bruegel the Elder. Bruegel was also interested in realistic details in individual people. He was very skillful in portraying large numbers of people. He captured scenes from everyday peasant life such as weddings, dances, and harvests. Bruegel's rich colors, vivid details, and balanced use of space gives a sense of life and feeling. Italian humanists were very interested in reviving classical languages and classical texts. When the Italian humanist ideas reached the North, people used them to examine the traditional teachings of the Church. The Northern humanists were critical of the failure of the Christian Church to inspire people to live a Christian life. This criticism produced a new movement known as Christian humanism. The focus of Christian humanism was on the reform of society. Of particular importance to humanists was education. The humanists promoted the education of women and founded schools attended by both boys and girls. The Renaissance spread to England in the mid-1500s. The period was known as the Elizabethan age, after Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabeth reigned from 1558 to 1603.
You're wearing very weird clothes.
She was well educated and spoke French, Italian, Latin, and Greek. She also wrote poetry and music.
Quickly, getting bored now.
As queen, she did much to support the development of English art and literature. The most famous writer of the Elizabethan age was William Shakespeare. Many people regard him as the greatest playwright of all time. Shakespeare was believed to have been born in 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon, a small town about 90 miles northwest of London. By 1592, he was living in London and writing poems and plays, and soon he would be performing at the Globe Theatre. Like many Renaissance writers, Shakespeare revered the classics and drew on them for inspiration and plots. His work displayed a masterful command of the English language and a deep understanding of human beings in his dramas and comedies. Oh, and histories, too. Shakespeare's most famous plays include the tragedies Macbeth, Hamlet, Othello, Romeo and Juliet, and King Lear, as well as the comedies A Midsummer Night's Dream and The Taming of the Shrew. While scholars think Shakespeare wrote all those, that's another story. Anyway, Shakespeare's works are still enjoyed by students today. Speaking of reading and writing, the Chinese invented block printing,
印刷
in which a printer carved words or letters on a wooden block, inked the block, and then used it to print on paper. Around 1045 CE, Bai Sheng invented movable type, or a separate piece of type for each character in the language. The Chinese writing system contains thousands of different characters, so most Chinese printers found movable type impractical. However, the method would prove practical for Europeans, because their languages have a small number of letters in their alphabets.
Check it. People has been reading books for millions of years, but thanks to new technology, nowadays is able to write them as well.
No, actually writing and books haven't been around for that long. During the 13th century, block printed items reached Europe from China. European printers began to use block printing to create whole pages to bind into books, instead of using scribes to copy works. However, this process was too slow to satisfy the Renaissance demand for knowledge, information, and books. Around 1440, Johann Gutenberg, a craftsman from Mainz, Germany, developed a printing press that incorporated a number of technologies in a new way. The process made it possible to produce books relatively quickly and cheaply. Using this improved process, Gutenberg printed a complete Bible, the Gutenberg Bible, in about 1455. It was one of the first full-size books printed with movable type. The printing press enabled a printer to produce hundreds of copies of a single work. In fact, in the same time it took a scribe to copy a single book, one person and a printing press could produce 500 books. For the first time, books were cheap enough that many people could buy them. At first, printers produced mainly religious works. Soon they began to provide books on other subjects such as travel guides and medical manuals. So what is the legacy of the European Renaissance? It was a period of great artistic and social change. It marked a break with the medieval period ideals focusing around the church. The Renaissance belief in the dignity of the individual played a key role in the gradual rise of democratic ideas. And don't forget the impact of the movable type printing press was tremendous. Some historians have suggested that its effects were even more dramatic than the arrival of personal computers in the 20th century. Hey, did you know the invention of the printing press is closer in time to the invention of the computer than the invention of paper? Now you know. And don't forget the changes in the arts. And don't forget the changes in society during the Renaissance. Renaissance ideas continued to influence European thought, including religious thought, which would lead to the Reformation.